Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to PCN's panel discussion about election 2022 here at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. We'll talk about the races for governor, U.S. Senate, and District 7 in Congress, and that's where we are right now in the northeastern part of the state. My name is Larry Casper. I'm from PCN. We cover Pennsylvania politics on cable TV, statewide, and on the internet. And our panel will help guide our discussion about election 2022. First, our host here at Muhlenberg College, political science professor Chris Borick, permitted us to bring cameras into his elections and campaign class. And we have Kevin Branco, member of the Lehigh Valley Democratic Committee, Sam Chen, principal director of the Liddell Group, and Lindsay Weber, reporter at the Morning Call. Welcome, everyone. And of course, the students of Muhlenberg College. Some of you will be voting for the very first time, so that's exciting, and we're looking forward to hearing your questions for the panel. So let's get started. Let's talk about the environment politically, Chris Borick. What kind of mood are the voters in?
First of all, welcome to Muhlenberg, Larry. It's great to have you in the panel as part of our elections and campaigns class. You know, it's a midterm election, and traditionally midterm elections after a new president comes into office is a tough environment for the president's party. And I think that general dynamic is in play in this election cycle. I think the winds, if you will, the tailwind, or the winds behind candidates are behind Republicans and in the face of Democrats. That's traditional, and you look over time, the way American electorate works often follows those patterns. Of course, there's unique features of any election cycle, and in this election cycle, there are a number of unique features. When you think about issues that have risen in salience for voters, after the Dobbs decision this summer on reproductive rights, it really did change some of the energy that's in this election cycle, giving Democrats a boost that I don't think they otherwise would have, and making an election cycle that in many ways favors Republicans, and probably still does in Pennsylvania and beyond, Larry. It gives Democrats a more competitive environment than they otherwise may have had.
Kevin, how do you see this election coming up?
I have to agree. Traditionally, like the professor said, the midterm elections are not good for the opposing party to the president. But the current events have really shifted it. We've seen it knocking doors and volunteering. People are terrified of drastic changes in our different policies, like you said, for reproductive rights. And also, I think the quality of candidates that are out there, comparatively, it lends itself to some of the Democrats that are running. That being said, it's still an uphill battle for the Democrats simply because there's a litany of issues that are affecting us on the national and world stage.
And Sam, why not pick up that thread and talk about affairs on the national stage that could influence this election in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is that my rule of thumb is to never disagree with Chris Borick. And so whatever he says, I'm going to start by doing that. But I think that he is right, and as Kevin mentioned, there is this trend in which when the White House is held by one office, the other party tends to do better in the midterm. But there's also other contributing factors, and the reason that's a trend is because of the voting public. And I think oftentimes people like me who are strategists, we forget that the most valuable resource in an election is the voter and is not cash. At the end of the day, you as voters will decide. And so what often happens is the party in the White House, there's almost a bit of tiring of that. And so voters want a change. They'll swing the other direction. So toward that end, what also matters is the candidate. And so Republicans may have the tailwinds if they have the right candidate. And then, of course, the third thing that Kevin and Dr. Borick both mentioned is our events. Events also impact us. And so things that we may not think about every day, abortion rights, for example, gas prices, for example, all of a sudden something like the Dobbs decision or inflation bring that to the forefront, and now voters begin to care about that. So at the end of the day, if we want to boil it down to one thing that matters, it is voters, And everything as far as who's in the White House and who the candidates are and what events are going on circles around voters. I think Washington misses this a lot. And they run candidates that look great on paper, and then they show up in the district, and we're like, you thought this person was a good choice? And it's because they miss the fact that D.C. doesn't decide campaigns. You guys do.
Lindsay, you're a reporter, so what stands out to you about this election as far as the mood of the voters is concerned?
Right. Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of what has been said. I think with the way things are on the national stage, there's a lot with the political climate that kind of directly affects people. I think inflation is one that's particularly salient. I mean, you can drive down the road and see the way that gas prices are going up and down, and that's something that really directly affects people. I think the Roe v. Wade overturning is another one where people kind of feel their rights being directly at risk, and I think that's the kind of thing that motivates voters to turn out, and I think that's why we're expected to see a higher voter turnout, at least compared to other midterm elections in the past.
So we've identified some current events that are going on that might influence voters, and Lindsay, you're saying that you're expecting a pretty good turnout. So as far as the other three of you are concerned, this mood we've identified in these current events, is it necessarily going to translate into action at the polls?
Yeah, I agree with Lindsay. I think there's a number of indicators right now from polling among one of them, that there is more energy in this cycle in relation to comparative midterms. We do see drop-offs, right? In American politics, we know that we get a really high turnout in presidential elections. It drops off dramatically in midterms, and then it just collapses often in off-year elections and primaries. In this cycle, I think there are signs that we'll see not presidential type turnout, but we'll see considerably higher than normal turnout for a midterm election like this.
Now, if overturning Roe versus Wade means abortion control goes to the states, how likely is it that our next governor will have this issue on his desk?
I think it's very likely. We've seen it already with our current legislature and governor. Our current legislature has been Republican dominated for, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor, 30 years, if not more, for House and Senate. And there's been several bills that have come up and gone to the governor that didn't stop your abortion rights, but it kind of infringed on them a little bit. They kind of pushed the envelope a little. And you've seen Governor Wolf veto several of them already. And honestly, I don't think that the House or the Senate is at risk at flipping this term around. So the next governor is going to have those bills on their desk. So the governor's race is big. If reproductive rights and women's rights are your jam, if they're your issue, make sure you pay attention to that race. That's where it's going to be decided.
I think what people forget too is that abortion pre-Dobbs, the central case for abortion rights came out of Pennsylvania. It's actually not Roe v. Wade, contrary to what politicians will tell you. It is a case out of Pennsylvania in the 90s called Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And Casey is Senator Bob Casey's father. He was a Democrat but pro-life governor and signed into law several restrictions to abortion rights. And they got challenged at the Supreme Court by Planned Parenthood of southeastern Pennsylvania. And that was the landmark case until Dobbs this June. And so when you look at that, Pennsylvania has been the battleground for abortion rights and in the past over issues of restrictions and so forth. We today have some of the most restrictive laws in the country. And so, yeah, I agree. I think this is something that you will likely see show up, regardless of who the governor is. I think knowing the Republicans in the state legislature, they're going to keep passing bills, right? The Republicans in Congress passed 40 repeals of Obamacare when Barack Obama was president. So they're going to keep passing bills. The question is the governor going to sign them or veto them?
All right, well, at this point, then, let's move on to the individual races here, and namely the race for governor. And Kevin, you mentioned a phrase a few minutes ago that caught my ear. You mentioned the quality of candidates. So why don't we start with you? No, I'm sorry, Kevin, not you. Sam. Apologies, Kevin. Sam, let's go to you, because I want to hear about Doug Mastriano's experience, who he is, what experience he brings to the table.
Well, first, let me apologize to Kevin. That's... You're
better dressed, that's right.
Well, I think, and Larry, you're absolutely right. I think quality of candidate matters, and this is what you are looking at when you look at the governor, any of these races, and this has been the concern. I don't want to say just among voters, among Republican voters. is whether State Senator Mastriano is the quality of candidate that can win the governor's office. So there's always a question of winnability. Is this the candidate who can unite enough voters to win? Pennsylvania is a very different state when it comes to this. So we are not just a red or blue state. And we're also not a state that just necessarily switches back and forth. In this area, there are a lot of ticket splitters, which means there are people who will go and vote for one candidate for president and one candidate for Senate of the opposite parties. And so when you think of candidates in Pennsylvania, you got to think of candidates that can win those ticket splits. So one question is electability. Is Senator Mastriano the electable kind of candidate? The other question is governance. Is this somebody that we think can govern? Is this somebody we want to govern? And even among Republicans, this was a massive issue during the primary. It still is. You see a number of Republicans, most recently James Schultz, who was a Trump White House attorney, endorsing Senator Mastriano's opponent. And it shows that among Republicans, there's considerable question about whether Mastriano is the right candidate on both of those counts, electability and ability to govern.
Well, Sam, let's expand on what you said about electability for the candidate, because after all, Mastriano was not backed in the primary by the Republican Party. They backed Lou Barletta, and at the last minute. Why did Republicans wait so long to put their weight behind a candidate?
A lot of times I think party organizations are very good at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And in this situation, I really think the party thought, and when I say the party, I don't mean the voters, I mean the Central Party in Harrisburg. I really think they felt that this would sort itself out, that there's a lot of candidates running, that they would coalesce. State Senator Dan Laughlin of Erie was an early candidate who dropped out and asked everybody to coalesce in order to make sure Senator Mastriano didn't win the primary. I think the party thought that many people would do this, and what parties do when they think this way is they underestimate the ego of somebody who's running for governor. If you're running for governor, you think fairly highly of yourself. You think that you've got answers. And so there's no way, very, very little chance you're going to drop out, especially if you're polling third or fourth, just drop out and say, let me go back somebody who's 5 points ahead of me. The moment when we do this process in Pennsylvania of getting on the ballot, we have to turn in petition signatures. The moment Senator Mastriano turned in tens of thousands of signatures from across the state, when he needed just a few thousand, that should have been a sign to the party. If they wanted to block him, that was their chance to do it. Waiting till a week before the election is only going to irritate those who are ready to decide to vote for him, and I think that's what happened.
And one more question for you, Sam. We've already acknowledged that current events can certainly influence what voters do at the polls. So let's consider that Donald Trump is under investigation for taking home classified documents from the White House to his house in Florida. How might that investigation affect the trajectory of Mastriano's campaign?
I actually don't think the Mar-a-Lago raid politically is going to have as much of an impact as, say, the Dobbs decision or inflation will. And the reason for that is when we talk about classified information, very, very few people understand what information we're looking at because it's classified. And so we're not always quite sure what the nature of classified information is. There's considerable question that Democrats have raised about who signed off on the FBI raid. This is not to say that they approve of former President Trump having these documents, but there is a question of the process in which the FBI took to raid the Mar-a-Lago residence. And I don't think it's something that people wake up every day thinking about, right? I think we wake up every day thinking about, am I going to have enough money to get gas in my car, which is inflation? Or you wake up thinking, if I need an abortion, can I get one? I don't think people wake up every day and ponder over breakfast, I wonder what the contents of the raid in Mar-a-Lago were. And because it's not front of mind, I actually don't think it's going to play as large a role. The one place it might is if Senator Mastriano gets taken down in some way, proverbially, through the January 6th Commission investigation from his involvement there, and if somehow that ties in to the raid in Mar-a-Lago, there's a connection there, but that's fairly thin at this point.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I have to agree. Through the January 6th investigations, now the Mar-a-Lago raid for the classified documents, everybody I talk to literally hundreds of people a day. And if you like President Trump and you follow President Trump, it's just noise. It's just, as they put, another witch hunt. If you are against President Trump and don't like him, it's another thing, like, oh, well, he did something else. All right, moving on. It's not going to change my vote. I'm still voting against the MAGA, quote unquote, revolution here. The real impact of it now, I really think, is if you support him, you support him. If you don't, you don't. It's just background noise.
So, Kevin, while you have the floor, why not tell us about the Democrat running for governor, Josh Shapiro?
So Josh Shapiro was from southeastern PA. He was a county commissioner in Montgomery County. He was a legislator in, I think it was 153rd district. And then he became our attorney general. He's very well spoken. He's making a very, very strong effort to reach across party lines. He did so as a legislator, and he's kind of tried to stay back a little bit from partisan politics during his attorney general stint, which is sometimes tough. But I think he was able to do a better job than more recent attorney generals. Yeah. But then you look at what he's campaigning on. He's campaigning on lowering corporate income tax, which a lot of Democrats are saying, wait a second, what do you mean lowering corporate income tax? Well, the fact of the matter is we have the second highest corporate income tax in the country, and we're losing people in our state because businesses aren't moving here with their headquarters. So it's a big argument that he's making, and he's driving a bipartisan vote to really kind of work his way past Mastriano and make sure it's not just an in the bag kind of election.
Lindsay, question for you. Josh Shapiro, as Attorney General, had gone after the Catholic Church for sexual abuse of kids. He's included that in a lot of his campaign information. How much weight does that carry with voters?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it comes down to issues that are really salient for voters and affect them every day. So I don't think that that's going to have the effect that political issues like inflation and like the overturning of Roe v. Wade had. But and I mean, I think that this is speculative too, but I would say that that's, a relatively popular position. It makes him look good that he was the one to come after those people and all of that wrongdoing. So I think in that way, and it's something that appeals to both sides too. I mean, I don't think either Republicans or Democrats want to condone, sexual abuse, but yeah.
Chris, let's talk about how these candidates are getting their names out there, and as far as you're concerned, what are the impressions they're trying to make on the voters, and how are they succeeding in your estimation?
Yeah, Larry, they're clearly going to what they think are their strengths, which candidates do, right? We're thinking in a campaigns class. Josh Shapiro has served as the Attorney General for the state. He won in 2020 on a statewide ballot where, of course, President Biden won, but also Republicans won offices like Treasurer and Auditor General in the state. So he was able to survive while other Democrats didn't, which I show as a sign of strength, that he's able to succeed in those areas. He wants this race in many ways to be about him, Josh Shapiro, as a reasonable, moderate voice from suburban Philadelphia who can guide a purple state in a way that represents kind of the middle of the road, if you will, and portray Doug Mastriano, Senator Mastriano, as an extreme candidate. That's an extreme candidate that's out of touch with Pennsylvanians, that he's part of a movement that included the January 6th insurrection, and that he simply doesn't represent the heart of Pennsylvania, that he is too extreme. Mastriano wants to make this race about issues like inflation. He wants to energize his base. He's part of a movement, if you will. He's a movement candidate, part of President Trump's broader MAGA movement, to energize that base and hopefully capitalize, I think, on a cycle that's generally beneficial to his party, and maybe make voters feel a little bit more at ease with him, which I think is a big, big challenge for Senator Mastriano, given his record of statements, his record of his rhetorical approach, his approach to politics. So, in terms of it's for me, despite this cycle, a matchup that is very good for Democrats. They couldn't have wanted, I think, a better matchup if you drew it up on paper, but one that's still in this cycle competitive. If this was 2018, Josh Shapiro wins this race by 20 plus points. It's not 2018, it's 2022, and I think it's going to be a much more competitive race, but they kind of want to position in those places.
And what kind of pattern can we anticipate from Pennsylvania voters? What they do with the governor's race? Do they switch back and forth between the major parties at predictable times? You've been observing this scene for a while.
Yeah, I lived through a lot of this over the years, as you could see by the gray. Pennsylvania loves to alternate party control between the two, the Democrats and Republicans. So, little trivia: Pennsylvania allowed governors to run for a second term back in the 70s for the first time that it happened, and since then you saw alternating control of party of the governor's office. Democrats 8 years, Republicans 8 years, Democrats 8 years. That cycle's gone on all the way through. There was one exception. Governor Corbett, who was a Republican, was elected in 2010. He only served one term. He's the first incumbent to lose since we've allowed this to happen. So the cycle, it's been 8 years of Governor Wolf, a Democrat. So once again, if we follow the cycles, and there's more to it than just like random cycles. This is part of the DNA of the electorate. It's fortuitous for Republicans. So this is a good year. If you gave me, if I'm running as an R or a D right now, you said you get to pick in Pennsylvania, give me the R in this cycle. I'd rather have the R on me than a D because of those cyclical aspects.
I'd like to remind all the students we have a microphone for you to ask your questions. So if something occurs to you, please get out of your seat, go to our microphone, because we want to make sure we hear every single word. So whatever your question is about election 2022, again, we're concentrating on governor, U.S. Senate, and Congress District number 7. So keep those in mind, please. Now, Sam, let's consider U.S. Senate now, and how about Mehmet Oz? And let's briefly review his background and experience.
Yeah, well, the fascinating thing is of Mehmet Oz, better known as Dr. Oz. I think everybody knows him as the TV doctor, ironically that Oprah Winfrey made famous. And I think everyone knows kind of what we've seen in the memes and the back and forth. He's from New Jersey. His connection to Pennsylvania is that he did medical school in Philadelphia and so forth. What's interesting about him is that he is of Turkish descent and faced a lot of the challenges that immigrants that today face, discrimination and things like that, and really made a name for himself, became a very well-known surgeon. When he first announced he was running, and most people were panning this as some kind of joke, there were a number of journalists who said, hey, this is not an endorsement, but a young Dr. Oz saved my mother's life or saved my father's life. They severed their aorta or some graphic thing like that, and the skill that he had as a surgeon served him very well. And he has a very remarkable Made in America background. Unfortunately, that's not what he's running on, and so which I think is a detriment to him and to his campaign. But he does have this kind of built in America background, someone that came over here, was discriminated against, and really built his career from the ground up. His decision to run in Pennsylvania has not really been addressed. It's been kind of thrown around as an attack in the primaries as well as in the general election, but it hasn't really been addressed. He hasn't really given a strong answer for why he suddenly wants to run for Senate, but he's running on pretty typical talking points at this juncture: inflation, issues that today we can't buy the same amount for the same amount of money, right? Gas is more expensive, milk is more expensive, food is more expensive, and we just can't keep this trajectory. That something has got to change. We can't keep it as politics as usual. And so it's fairly standard. I mean, other than his fame, what's interesting about him versus Mastriano is other than the fame that he has and that both hold President Trump's endorsement, he is actually much less extreme than State Senator Mastriano. Now, he was not involved with January 6th. He's not. He just said the other day that if he were in the Senate, he would have voted to confirm the 2020 election results. And so somebody who is not nearly in that same boat, even though he holds the former president's endorsement. And so he's running a much more traditional Republican campaign in that sense.
Anybody else care to comment on that candidate?
I'll never pass up opportunity to talk. I gotta kind of echo what Sam just said. Dr. Oz, a lot of people are treating him like a joke, but the fact of the matter is he really is the epitome of the American dream, right? His parents came here as a poor immigrant. They faced the same issues. I think where he falls off, though, is his successes. He doesn't use his successes as, look at what I've done. I've been in rooms where he's giving speeches to people wearing T-shirts and jeans, and he's standing there wearing a $1,000 suit talking about his Ivy League education. He seems very elitist, to say the least, and he tries to hit the typical National Republican talking points instead of focusing on his successes.
Well, you've certainly all heard about the debate about his residence status here in Pennsylvania. Chris, can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, so, this is the juxtaposition. Matchups matter, right? Cycles matter, candidates matter, and matchups matter. And this, from the start, has been a challenge for Dr. Oz. He is, as Sam alluded to, his relationship with the state is tenuous at best. He has homes in New Jersey and in Hollywood. He's running against John Fetterman, who we haven't talked about a lot yet. But John Fetterman is a native Pennsylvanian, has lived in Pennsylvania, went to school in Pennsylvania, came to fame as a mayor of Braddock, a western Pennsylvania hard times town, steel town. And the juxtaposition of someone like Fetterman, who's been on the ground in Pennsylvania, lived his life, worked in communities, worked in politics, been elected here, against someone who is very famous and might have a good narrative that Kevin and Sam talked about, but ultimately is a celebrity who seems to have dropped into the state just to get elected to office. And that juxtaposition, I think, right from the start, has been a heavy hurdle for Oz to get over.
All right, it's time to hear from the students here at Muhlenberg College, and we're going to go to our first one. And tell us your name, please, and then ask your question.
Hello, my name is Serena Herzog. I'm a senior at Muhlenberg College, and my very first election was the midterm in 2018. And I actually took a gap year and did political organizing because for me, climate is at the top of my mind always, and especially in this election. And I know that some of the candidates, like Josh Shapiro, have already kind of been dealing with the impacts of climate in his role as Attorney General. He has been urged to stop the Mariner East pipeline and deal with other issues like that. So I'm wondering what role you think climate will play in this election. And we're still in hurricane season. We haven't had one yet, which is kind of eerie, but there's still time for one to occur. And if one were to impact the East Coast prior to November, do you think that would have any influence on the outcome of this election for, I guess I'm interested in governor and Senate as well?
Who wants to go first?
At the risk of, Serena hears me all the time, so I'd like to hear from her. I can't, but Serena, it's such a great point. And if you look at the saliency of this issue, right, we talk about issues that are salient, important. There's a major importance to this cohort, this generation. That issue, climate change, is among the very top tier. It's also among the top tier issue for Democrats. If you identify as a Democrat, it is amongst the top tier. It's still an amazing partisan divide in this issue. Now, it's pretty nuanced what Republicans think about it, not outright denial or skepticism of the science. But some questions about its impact and other things that still remain within Republican circles. If you look at a divide, well, I've polled a lot on this. Pew polls on this, and they list 18 issues that are important to voters every year and ask people to say how important they are. There's not a bigger issue where the divide between Republicans and Democrats are in terms of the importance of the issue. So from a partisan perspective, it's still very, very much alive in this race, and I think the salience has grown over time to voters. Is it in the same rank as inflation, this year reproductive rights? Not quite, but it's moving in that direction.
I think the other challenge I would add is that Pennsylvania is a coal state and it's a steel state, and where Lieutenant Governor Fetterman's from is part of the Rust Belt, and the great challenge with people from that area, including Fetterman, Congressman Connor Lamb, and others, and Senator Shapiro, or Attorney General Shapiro running statewide, is that there are a lot of Democrats from those regions that are very cautious about environmental policies. They believe that environmental plans like the Green New Deal are what put them out of jobs. And so Democrats in Pennsylvania struggle with this in the way that Democrats in Massachusetts may not. I think the question about hurricanes, I think what happens when the hurricane hits is that I don't think most voters immediately go to climate change. I think most voters immediately go to cleanup and help. And so whichever party is in office, if they do the cleanup and the help well, that gives that party a boost. And I don't think the pivot is right away to policy. And that doesn't mean it won't ever be. I just don't think in this moment we've gotten there yet.
You know, I got to echo what you said, Sam, there. You know, look at during, I think it was Hurricane Sandy, when New Jersey was decimated, President Obama came and met with Chris Christie. And Chris Christie was on hot coals because he met with the Democratic president. But his point was, I'm not here politically, I need help from the federal government. So it ends up giving a boost to whoever's in power. Now, what you were saying about climate change in this state, remember, we're an energy producing state. We're the first state in the nation to produce oil. You said we're a coal state. Not so much anymore. We produce 21% of the whole nation's natural gas. We are an energy producing state. End of story. And the fact of the matter is the gas industry spends up to $60 million a year in lobbyists to make sure that they don't have things like severance taxes, which is the tax on the gas actually coming out of the ground, and making sure that they have looser restrictions on their fracking that they're doing. I think it was session during 2020's term, there was a thing put out called Energized PA. It was a package of 8 bills by the Republican Party, and they were just killing the environmental restrictions that were on the gas companies.
All right, thanks very much for those answers. Let's move on to our next student who has a question. Step up to that mic and tell us your name.
My name's Alex Wagner. So I just had a question. From the primary results earlier this year, they're very different between how each candidate won. Fetterman won in a landslide, and Dr. Oz barely squeaked by. And I know that Oz faced a lot of attacks from a lot of his other Republican opponents for his ties to the Turkish government, his ties to New Jersey, and the fact that he's a celebrity. And I just wanted to ask you guys, like, what's the feel from the Republican side in a way? Like, can he unite the Republican Party behind him because he won the Republican nomination by like a percentage? And what can he do to do that, essentially?
I think from a Republican perspective, he can, and they would say he has to, right? If you want, this is a Republican seat right now, Senator Toomey holds it, so if you want to keep that seat in a 50-50 Senate, they're going to say he has to be able to unite them. I think the challenge is, how does he get there? One of the things, and you're seeing this already, is pointing to Lieutenant Governor Fetterman and how progressive he is, and his background. And I know we haven't talked about Fetterman extensively yet, but again, this is somebody who was a trust fund child. His parents paid his bills into his 50s. He puts off an image of a kind of a blue collar image that doesn't really match his background. He is also Ivy League educated, the same way Oz is, and so you're going to see them try to draw Oz's support from putting negatives on Fetterman. And I think that's going to be your biggest approach. Oz is part of the problem being a celebrity is that you're pretty well defined already, and it's hard to shed that definition. And so the best thing they can do at this point is try to cast doubt on Fetterman, even if they can't convince a Fetterman voter to vote for Oz. If they just put enough doubt that a Fetterman voter stays home, then that's half the battle. Right? And so I think that's what you're going to see a lot of them do. If we can put enough question on Fetterman, can we coalesce the base around us?
I'm glad we're getting more into John Fetterman. So, Kevin, would you tell us more briefly what his resume looks like up to this point?
So, Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, he was mayor of Braddock, PA. How he campaigns is that he was living in Braddock and his best friend died in a car accident. He actually ran for mayor to help fix the streets so things like this don't happen again. He was a very influential mayor of Braddock. And that's kind of odd to say because it's a town of, 1,500 people maybe? It's like the size of this campus. But he was out there. He was a leader of the people. He famously has tattoos up his arm of everybody that has died in gun violence in Braddock, the date of each death. He started a homeless shelter in Braddock because it was a dying steel town, a lot like we see around here with Bethlehem Steel. He then became lieutenant governor, and he's been a fairly progressive governor and unabashedly, vocal about his views, with flying flags for the LGBTQ community and the legalized marijuana community right off his lieutenant governor balcony that took a lot of heat from our state leaders. Now he's moving forward as that real-world candidate. And just to expand on a little bit what Sam said earlier, you saw Connor Lamb kind of get run over, who is a fantastic candidate. Probably one of the best candidates running for office this primary, but he got run over by Fetterman simply because Fetterman has that look of a real world guy. He's not that polished politician with the perfect answers and the well-rehearsed and polished look.
And we're going to talk more about John Fetterman, but first let's go back to the students. And young lady, tell us your name and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Maya Brooks. So I'm from Maine, where the demographic of voters is almost entirely Caucasian. So I'm interested in how the race for governor, the two candidates are appealing to marginalized communities and people of color, because as basic political science books tell us, people of color tend to vote Democrat, but as we saw in the 2016 and 2020 election, that wasn't necessarily what happened. So I'm interested in how that's going to play out in this race.
They hear a lot from me, so I want to share with my panel if they'd like to go. I have some answers.
I'll start briefly as a person of color. My experience in the political world, as somebody that works in it full time, has always been that I get asked to be on a lot of palm cars and in a lot of commercials. And I get calls every year, and they make their pitch, and I say, "Are you asking because I'm Asian?" And there's a long pause on the other side of the phone. I think we saw this in 2016 when the Democrat National Committee got hacked and these emails came out saying, hey, we need to do a press conference. We don't have enough African Americans for this to be a good press conference. We don't have enough Latinos to make this a good press conference. Let's go find some. And a lot of minorities thinking, wait, are we just a prop? And as somebody who's been in the field and maybe has just been calloused by this, yes, we have just been the prop for a long time. And so what are candidates doing to reach out? I mean, I think, unfortunately, in eyes of candidates, not including Kevin, but in eyes of other candidates, I think a lot of times they look at minorities or women or the LGBTQ community as a vote base, and that's it. And they think, what do I have to do to get them to vote for me? Right? If I have to fly a rainbow flag, I'll fly a rainbow flag, and if they vote for me, that's all that matters. But to your point, I think in 2016, 2020, you see that no race, no gender identity, no religion, no nationality is monolithic. And so people say, hey, why, I get asked all the time, why have you voted and worked for Republicans? You're Asian. And I said, well, the color of my skin is supposed to determine my political affiliation? I mean, it is one of the most racist things you could say to someone. And I think the reach out is very, very vote driven. And this is what those of you who are in groups like that, whether you're a racial minority or it's a gender identity or whatever it is, I think we have to be careful about what we're seeing. This is always the joke I hear about from the LGBTQ community about Pride Month, where all the corporations suddenly change their logos, and that's supposed to mean that they stand with them. And so we got to be very cautious about candidates. Are they looking for a vote, or do they actually care? And maybe they even disagree with something we support, but do they care about us, right? I think that's on us as voters to press them on, because the reality is the calculation in an election is who can get me to the next victory. And if we don't, like for me as a racial minority, but whether you're a woman or a racial minority or part of the LGBTQ community or a religious minority, whatever it might be, if we don't push on the candidates and try to have those honest, genuine conversations, we will never be anything besides a talking point. And so it is incumbent on us.
Chris, what were you going to say before you deferred to Sam?
Well, first of all, Sam brilliantly articulate comments about how this issue has to be thought about are just wonderful, and as Sam usually produces such cogent thoughts. I'll just add from kind of a turnout game, right? So Democrats in the state, often the engine historically for Democratic victories in the state has been the city of Philadelphia. right? It's the most racially diverse place in the state. It's the biggest county in the state. It's the biggest city in the state. Often, for Democrats to win statewide, you have to not only win, for example, 90% of voters that identify as black in the city, but you have to have the turnout there. And I think for Democrats, there's a concern often that not only can we get keep our 90% margin or close to that, but can we make sure people are turning out? And I think for Democrats, it is a concern right now in this off-year election. Will you have energy among people of color in urban areas, in particular in the state, that are going to rally for the candidates? It's something they're attentive to, I think, and considering.
Go ahead, Lindsay. I know you're waiting.
Yeah, I think this is something that has come up a little bit from what my other panelists have said, but I think that, like you had just said, a problem for Democrats is the idea that they can take the votes of, for example, black voters for granted. They just assume that, because we're pushing these progressive policies, that black voters will automatically support us. And I think that's not necessarily the case. And I think it's interesting, Chris, that you brought up Philadelphia specifically, because Mehmet Oz has been spending a lot of time there campaigning versus John Fetterman. Obviously, he's been having these issues with his health and hasn't been on the campaign trail that much, but he has yet to make, I think he maybe did make one appearance in Philadelphia since he's been on the road to recovery after his stroke. But I think that's just one example of, the ways in which Republicans might try to appeal to voters that they wouldn't necessarily. I mean, people think of Republicans as sometimes just appealing to like a white kind of voter base, but I think that they can have appeal sort of beyond that, especially if those voters feel that the candidate is really taking the time to hear out their concerns and know the issues that they care about. So,
let's take another question from the class.
All right. Hello, my name is Jake Rothberg. I'm a junior here at Muhlenberg College. So I wanted to ask a question about the conduct of elections themselves. I know Mastriano has said that he would not have certified the 2020 election, despite there being really no evidence of any voter fraud at all. I know you said Dr. Oz indicated that he would have not objected in the Senate, but but obviously both the Senate and the governor certifies the elections here in Pennsylvania. The Senate can object. Any senator can object. I was wondering, how the potential concern that a governor would not certify the results of an election, or that possibly a senator would try to override the will of the people, how that could possibly affect the midterm election this fall.
Yeah, I think this is a big issue. Maybe, again, not at the level of reproductive rights, inflation, or others, but election issues, according to some polling I've been seeing, have risen in terms of salience of how people view them as threats to democracy, if you will. And just like, and this is an important thing about Pennsylvania, just like with the case that I've heard my fellow panelists make, that reproductive rights are particularly important in the governor's race, because whoever is going to be in that seat will likely have the veto pen or the signature pen to deal with reproductive legislation that comes out of the legislature. Governors in Pennsylvania have incredible power. They appoint the Secretary of State, who is the top official for managing elections in Pennsylvania. And so that's an incredibly important role that comes out of this and makes election issues all the more important. Also, the incredible differences that we see, just like in reproductive rights between Doug Mastriano and Josh Shapiro, make the choice really distinct, right, and how they're viewing elections, how they see the role of elections. You could see it in Shapiro's efforts, not so much in Mastriano now talking about that issue, but Shapiro wanting to make it a clear part of his campaign that if Doug Mastriano's elected, you're going to get someone that's an election denier, the result denier, and someone that has made statements that he controls. Ultimately, he has this soundbite that he gets to decide, which I think is pretty potent.
One thing I would add to that, as an aside, is I think you watch the January 6th Commission, you watch things like this, there is a movement among Democrats right now to support Republican candidates who supported January 6th and who are election deniers. And Josh Shapiro is guilty of this, of running ads for Senator Mastriano in the primary with the belief that it will be an easier matchup for me in the fall. We saw this with gerrymandering Congressman Adam Kinzinger's seat out in Illinois. We saw this with funding a MAGA election-denying candidate in the primary against Peter Meyer in Michigan, who voted to impeach President Trump as his first vote in Congress. I think this is playing with fire. I think if you sit on the January 6th Commission and you want to tell the country with a straight face that that day was an insurrection and a tragedy for America, then you cannot turn around and fund candidates who support that. I think the Democrat Party is playing with fire. I can't take seriously when they say that they believe in democracy, when they turn around and do things like this. And this is where I think winning at all costs has a cost.
All right, I'd like to suggest to our panel to make your answers a little shorter in the future, simply because we're trying to get as many students on our program as possible. Go ahead, please.
All right. Hello, my name is Josh Schlesinger. I'm a sophomore here at Muhlenberg College, and my question, actually, I have a question about both the House race, PA7, and the Senate race. So for the Senate race, we've seen that over the summer, Fetterman has been unable to campaign due to his health reasons, while odds have slowly been building a ground game. And we're starting to see in the polling, it kind of paid off a little bit as he's been building momentum. Do you think that momentum will continue, or will Fetterman kind of be able to hold the line against it? And my question for PA7 is, do you think Susan Wild will be able to, or any Democrat really, will be able to hold the seat in the future elections, especially this one? In 2018, it was a pretty neutral seat, and it went pretty much with the national environment. I think she won it by about 10 points, and it went, and the total congressional national environment was about D+9. In 2020, we saw a D+3 neutral environment, and we saw that she won it by about 3 points. Now, however, the seat's been rated as about R+3 in the new map. Do you think that Susan Wild will be able to hold that seat, or do you think she's pretty much DOA due to an already hostile seat plus a hostile neutral environment?
So I'll go ahead and answer your second question first, because that's kind of been what I've been following most closely as a reporter, is the PA7 race. And I think that something that makes this race extremely challenging for Wild is the redistricting of the district that she needs to get elected in. So her district now has all of Carbon County as a part of it, which is the county north of here that has towns like Jim Thorpe, and that's a very conservative county. I don't know the exact margin, but that county voted relatively heavily for Trump in 2020. And I think that combined with what Chris had said earlier about how the momentum is kind of all on Republican side, makes things really challenging for Susan to be reelected. But that being said, something that has really energized Democrats, and not even Democrats, but independent voters as well, has been the abortion issue. And that's something that Susan is really strong on. She, even though she's a relatively moderate Democrat, she has really been an advocate for reproductive rights, and I think that that's something that could work in her favor. But that being said, I mean, you read off the statistic that the district is R+3. I don't know that is enough for her, but I mean, we can only wait until November to see how that'll turn out. It's not like we can predict the future, but she's up against a challenge to be reelected for sure.
Go ahead, please, Chris.
No, really, and great question, Josh. And the context you put in there matters, and as Lindsay reinforced, is that district, those changes, right? Cycles matter, district design matters, and it's just on the margin. The old 7th, the one that was in 2020, included a section of Monroe County that was pretty left-leaning, the Stroudsburg area, and as Lindsay said, adding Carbon County into that in an already tight district could be the type of thing that flips a congressional district. What leads to flips? Cycles, redistricting that benefits one party or the other, and as you described it, those marginal things really benefit. Another place where I think the reproductive decision might be really impactful is a close race like this, and that is a boost that certainly I think Representative Wild gets from that issue that she wouldn't have otherwise had. Great questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's have our next question. Go ahead.
Hi.
Oh, tilt it down if you need to.
I don't know.
There you are. Good.
Hi. Hi, my name is Marissa Cohen. I'm also a sophomore here at Muhlenberg. My question is kind of concerning John Fetterman's kind of unprecedented use of social media throughout this election. His use of Twitter and TikTok and like the memes on there and pop culture, I think, is definitely speaking to the kind of this younger age group, which historically does not have the best turnout for elections. So I guess my question is for you guys, just looking ahead to these midterms, how do you believe that his kind of social media campaign and the way that that he's been trying to reach out to this younger age group is going to affect the younger voter turnout in the midterm elections?
So I think it's actually going to help out a lot, and it's kind of a snowball effect, right? So he does something kind of outlandish, like when he flew a plane over the Jersey Shore. Comic brilliance, right? But all of a sudden it was picked up by all the media. And now everybody knows that even though Dr. Oz lives in a house that he purchased for his in-laws in Montgomery County, everybody knows he's actually really from New Jersey and he moved here a year ago. So I think the keep poking over and over and over again, it keeps them on people's forefront of their thought. I think you see it along a lot of campaigns. Constant poking online, because listen, when's the last time you sat down at night and watched TV and didn't have your phone next to you that you're scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, whatever kids are scrolling through now, during commercials? Seriously, or if there's a football game on during slow times, baseball slow the entire time, you sit there and scroll through social media. These things are things that you're seeing more and more. There was just a stat that I saw the other day that right now 25 and lower, ages 25 and lower, watch less than an hour of TV a day. So that means their only source of media is their phone, is social media. And then that spurs into them talking to their parents who might be watching more TV, and grandparents and neighbors and stuff like that. So I think it's going to have a major effect. Will it drive more young people out? Maybe, but I think it's going to have a larger effect with a ripple to other aspects of community.
I think I would say that if it can drive out young people, it succeeds. But on the whole, majority of voters still aren't on social media. I think the other challenge that we have with social media is how do we, I mean, the poking is great, what Kevin said, but how do you discuss policy in 280 characters or less? And so what I think often happens is you can get lost in the weeds, or you can start thinking social media is the rest of the voting base when it's not. And if that's, like when they debate, if that's all they come to is someone's from New Jersey, someone's a trust fund baby, I don't think voters are going to be very happy. And so the danger of social media, I think, is that candidates think it is the entirety of reality. And if you drink that Kool-Aid, then I think social media can be more harmful than helpful.
It's an echo chamber.
Yes, yeah.
And that makes me think, Sam, of just disinformation in general suddenly comes to mind if that's all you rely on.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great observation.
All right, next student question, please.
Hi, my name is Paige Weisberg. I'm a senior. My question actually kind of follows up Marissa's question. Last spring, the Democratic candidates for the primary were invited to come and speak here, and John Fetterman was the only one that did not show up. I think that his campaign has done a really good job in terms of like getting him like a good base on social media, but I don't think that he understands the importance of actually meeting the young people that he is trying to get to vote for him. Why do you think that he thinks that young people will support him if they don't feel that he is actually supportive of them?
Well, I'm just going to say really quickly, that was hosted by City and State PA. I'm on the advisory board for them, so for ethical reasons, I will not comment on this question.
It's a Democrat. I'll turn to the Democrats first.
So honestly, I had concerns about that as well. During the primary, I'm trying to figure out who I was going to vote for between the candidates. I've always liked John. I know John. But when he didn't show, that was of concern. Now, that being said, when he was in a lead by quite a bit. When you're in the lead by that much, showing in a debate can do nothing but hurt you. It's not going to get you more votes. It's not going to give you, you're already at 20%, it's not going to give you 22. You know, it can only bring you down a little bit. So that could be more strategic. I'm just saying it could be. I'm not saying it is. I've also heard that from inside the Fetterman camp that there was some mixed messaging there. It was almost like a setup for him to miss that one. It was just rumor. I've heard it a few different times. I don't know how factual that is.
Can I just add really quickly? You know, I think debates still matter. As someone that wants to see candidates in different venues, I think it's valuable for voters. Strategically, as Kevin just referenced, you know, people that are in the lead often push as far as they can to debate less and push them down the road. I think that's what the Lieutenant Governor was doing with our debate here last spring. I think strategically he just felt, he could do that. He has this week, or just in the last day, said he will debate Dr. Oz sometime in October. I don't know the details, and I haven't read a lot more today. So I think we're going to see that, and I think given his health situations, there is I think a desire to see him in these venues to demonstrate that he's ready for this challenge.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question, but try to make it brief, please.
I'm Eitan Redsky. I've been worried about opportunity in the United States. How will the current election this year improve education? And I support wealth tax. Will wealth tax help provide a boost to working class people? And in order to increase its investments in communities, I'm interested in metal industries. Do you think there's a way we can protect the environment and bring back metal industries?
Good questions.
Are the candidates making any promises about education, Chris?
They are. Great question. Eitan, education, right, is, especially for different groups, a very salient issue, a group that's here, that's describing. The question in particular about education, we see the debate, the biggest debate on education right now is on finance at the higher education level, and with the president's decision to forego some student loans and allow individuals not to pay back a portion of those. I'm very fascinated to see, in particular, how that plays out in the election cycle. There's some mixed polling on this. I've already seen Republicans try to put out ads to say this is a giveaway to wealthy Americans, educated Americans, at the expense of the working class. I've seen other polling that shows it generally favorably viewed. A majority of Americans like the idea of doing this. And so education certainly is important. We need not say this in a room like this. Exactly where it plays out in the race would be interesting if we still have time to hear the parties.
And I'm sorry that you put it that way, Chris, because you're right on the ball. We've just run out of time. Exactly. So that's right. So you sense that we are running out of time, and I just want to thank our panel. It's been political science professor Chris Borick here at Muhlenberg College. He's been our host. Kevin Branco, member of the Lehigh Valley Democratic Committee. Sam Chen, principal director of the Liddell Group. And Lindsay Weber, reporter at the Morning Call. And of course, you, the students here at Muhlenberg College, thank you so much for participating. I'm Larry Casper for PCN. The election's in November, so cast your vote and make your voice heard. Thanks for watching.